We would like to thank the following sponsors: Bullet, Osh India, Snorkel, Genie, JLE. Our association partners: Oshai, Enhancing HSE and Culture; Sarah, Construction Equipment Rental Association; and our media partner, WSHH, World of Safety and Health Asia. We would also like to welcome ME&SA, here, powering the future. iRise India. We would like to thank the following sponsors: Bullet, Osh India, Snorkel, Genie, JLE. Our association partners: Oshai, Enhancing HSE and Culture; Sarah, Construction Equipment Rental Association; and our media partner, WSHH, World of Safety and Health Asia. We would also like to welcome ME&SA, here, powering the future. iRise India.
Ali, I think we lost you there for a moment.
Oh, I forgot. So, again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Indian National Safety Week Day 2, and we will talk about safety and safe, harness and safety. And and you, hi, Mr. Jason Woods, IPAF Regional Manager for Middle East and South Asia, to give us a word.
Thank you, Ali. You had me worried there for a moment. I can see you speaking, but I could not hear. I thought maybe I was getting a little bit old in my old age. But anyhow, modern technology sometimes catches us out, but this also has its great advantages naturally for running events like this whilst we're sat in our office and discussing safety aspects. So for those who joined us yesterday, thank you very much. It was very constructive. We had some great support from Josie John and Pawan, who's got massive amount of experience in the industry, especially in and around the Indian region. So yeah, looking forward to today, and I have a lot to discuss with you guys. So back to yourself for a minute, Ali.
Yes, thank you, Jason. So, due to unexpected circumstances and a little bit of time difference, you, Maxwell, from Chubb Global Risk Advisors, couldn't join us today, but will join us in other sessions. So, if I could call out Jason Woods of IPAF to talk us more about safety and harness. Welcome back, Sir
Thank you.
Jason.
Thank you. And Hugh will pick back up with us on another session. We will just create a different topic for Hugh to fit in. But again, a very experienced safety professional, which I'm sure you can learn a lot from. So I'm just going to share my screen for a moment. Okay, so I'll just, oh, didn't want that one. This is the one I want. Okay, so now all I can see is my screen in front of me. So I will continue. So a couple of basics to start off with. Naturally, selecting your harness is a massive important job. Certainly when we relate it to different types of elevating work platforms. And I think that this is probably something which a lot of mute users and managers kind of forget. We always focus too much, I think, on the height where the platform needs to be positioned. And we kind of sometimes forget about the additional personal protective equipment which we may need whilst we're operating the machine as users or passengers. So I've collected a number of slides which we will discuss in some depth. We are taking questions, so please, in the comment boxes, please write your questions down because you may have questions on the equipment, the PPE equipment, which you're already using. So as you can see on the images to start off with, let's talk about the main image, which is the actual harness. So the harness is designed to fit around the body. So we call this a full body harness. It has connecting points for the legs and connecting points for the chest. It's not split or not divided. It ideally should fit comfortably around the body. And as I go on, I will discuss in more depth. You'll notice a couple of key indicators that the harness is color coded. There is a reason for that, which relates back to when you're inspecting the harness, it makes the eye much easier to see any defects, whether it's buckles or stitching and so on. The harness should be in good condition and it should do what it's meant to do. So on the top left-hand image, you'll see a full body harness with a D-shackle on the top. And then when we drop down to the second image, you'll see it's a single hook, as we call it in some regions. The real terminology is a carabiner. And the idea is that this connector will connect to the harness and connect to the platform or somewhere in the platform. Again, we'll talk about this in a little bit more depth as we go further into it. The third image which I'd like to highlight is that it's also a carabiner, a lanyard. This time it has two hooks and one hook for the harness. So two hooks meaning that it's got an option to hook onto an anchorage point, but instead of once, now it's saying that I can do it twice. And then the smaller hook as carabiner would be connected then to the harness, which is generally fitting on the back between your shoulder blades if it's a single D shackle. Just bear in mind that some safety harnesses might have more than one connector point. So it might be a 3-point harness, it might be a 4-point harness, or it might be a 1-point harness. It all depends on what you buy or purchase from the manufacturers, for an example. So reading the text now of choosing my PPE equipment, so you can see the images and you can see them quite clearly. But let's focus on the hazards. Where does it go wrong and why is this so important? Well, certainly the hazard is on a boom type machine. If we're traveling over rough ground, uneven ground, maybe a few potholes, some kind of dips where the surface is not level, it's something which can give you movement in the platform. And when we have this type of movement, we call it boom flex if it's a boom lift machine. So what that does then, it can create unnecessary and certainly an uncomfortable position for the person as the operator or the passengers, which they may even get to a position where they're having a lot of movement. If you think in your mind like a roller coaster, something like this maybe, it's possible depending of the ground condition. So certainly, PPE is massive for when we're in the platform working, and it should be chosen correctly and it should be used correctly. We're using a key word there, why restraint, and I'll explain in a moment why restraint, because restraint will restrain the operator from being flung out of the platform, and the restraint can certainly restrict the movement of the operator, so he's not having the need to maybe climb out of the platform or step up onto the mid handrail. Focusing on the disadvantages of fall arrest. So if you look at the plastic sleeve in the lanyard where it has two hooks, that's kind of a shock absorber. And I think that what we've got to take into consideration is if you do fall out of a platform when you're clicked on, what's going to happen with the lanyard as the fall becomes a shock load to that anchorage point. We will talk in a lot more depth there. But look at the downward vertical impact as a shock load. 600 kg as a vertical impact force, which then moves into the shock absorber. So we've got to think about and take into consideration the safe working load of the platform, and how much the downward pressure or force would be for the body, certainly hitting the anchorage point. So like I say, we need to take these into considerations, and we need to focus on this. There are standards available. Most machines are designed to a standard. So we're looking at either EN standard for an example. It could be an ANSI A92 standard for an example. In this case, we'll talk about EN 280, and the anchorage point is designed as a restraint lanyard, not a fall arrest. know what I'm doing.
Or you just click on presentation. Go to presentation.
I'm on presentation mode. Oh, I mean, right, I don't know what I'm doing there.
Press F5.
Okay, I don't know what I'm doing.
Your PowerPoint.
Right, Ramona, I do not know what I'm doing. Let's start again.
Yeah.
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry guys and ladies and gentlemen, but I seem to have a few issues here. But anyway, let me go back. I think that Ali is sharing my screen now. Correct, Ali, or not? Okay, so if we can just go back a slide, a minute, Ali. Yeah, so just highlighting on this slide, as I briefly mentioned, that um, you know there are different designs and certainly full body harnesses, chest harnesses, belt harnesses, um, and the lanyards. They don't always come as a complete unit, so we have to do a little bit of research on what type of harness and lanyard and connector that we need to be thinking about. So Ali, if you can move to the next slide. I'm not going to touch share slides and presentation because I think it goes wrong. So again, a very short video clips here of an operator, a typical operator. Um, the operator needs to be a couple of items to highlight is one, certainly that the harness equipment should fit the operator comfortable. And what should not happen is that it becomes loose fitting on the body. Um, by it being comfortable, it should not take away or increase any or areas where it would give us some uncomfortableness if a fall was to occur. As you can see in the middle image, once we click on it, you'll see that we have the option then to reduce the lanyard to suit the operator inside the platform. Now, bearing in mind, most platforms in height to top handrail will kind of roughly be the same dimension, but remember that our lanyards has the ability to change. And with that in your mind, that naturally that depending of the length and the width of the platform, we may need to adjust our lanyard to suit. But the key message really on that image there is certainly to have your lanyard as short as possible. So if we can move to the next slide, Ali. So moving into the platform, obviously access and egress is very important. And with that in mind, as I said earlier, that we need to start thinking about that body positioning, how I'm going to operate the controls, and certainly where the harness should be connected to. But keeping in mind that lanyard should be as short as possible. And this is a typical example of a boom type machine platform, which you're most likely going to see in many regions. Okay, let's go to the next slide, Ali. So then we move then from one size platform to another, and some of you guys will have the understanding that some are on the larger platforms, meaning that we have the ability to have extra capacity in the platform. So now we're meaning that we can put more equipment or maybe another person. What we must think about is your standard harness and lanyard needs to then allow the operator to move from one area to another. There will be restrictions. Obviously, there's only a certain number of anchorage points within the platform. So again, just because there's 6 harness anchorage points doesn't mean that we can have 6 people in the platform. We have to think about a number of things. One is the safe working load. We need to think about the operators and passengers. The harness anchorage points, are really designed for different work positions. So as I say, it doesn't mean that we can just keep increasing. And just remember in the back of your mind that if you turn to an extra capacity powered access machine as a boom lift, you will come across some restrictions. So for an example, if it's at 125 feet in height at an extra capacity platform, then really by increasing the safe working load, you may have restrictions in height. So take these into consideration when you are dealing with the larger platforms. But in certainly in relation to the harness, we must make sure that we're in the right position, the operator's in a comfortable position, and certainly that the operator shouldn't have a tail of trail of harness, a lanyard behind him, meaning that it becomes a trip hazard. So always use it as short as possible. Excuse me. Okay, Ali, let's go to the next slide. There's always a burning question I come across, which will relate to harness or the operators wearing a harness on a vertical lift. Now, ideally, you know, the concept of wearing harnesses is to try and reduce the or the chance of a person falling out of the platform. On vertical lifts, it's slightly different to boom lifts, because if you think of the concept of a vertical, it just lifts up and down. The handrail system kind of is a fall prevention measure. So technically, it's preventing. It's already preventing the body from falling out of the platform. But sometimes there are site rules that we have to wear a harness in a vertical, as a site rule may say that all MEUPs will require harnesses. So if this is the case, I think that we just need to think about, are there any additional hazards in place? So Ali, if you can just click on the top left image for me, and we have a very short indicator. So as you can see, just by maneuvering the platform on a vertical, if I was an operator and I'm positioned in one area, it's possible that it could create a blind spot for me as an operator, because my movement is restricted as I'm clipped onto the anchorage point in the scissor lift platform, as it is in this case. And the image on the bottom right, you can see that there are different types of scissor lift platforms again. Some are very small and narrow, and some will or move into larger platform areas, allowing the workforce to have a bit more maneuverability around that work platform then whilst they're at height. So some takeaways there is, on vertical lifts, I think we have to delve into this question a little bit more deeper than just putting the harness on. Are we increasing risks by wearing a harness, and is it certainly restricting the movement of the operators whilst they're trying to carry out their activity whilst they're at height? So Ali, if you can move to the next slide. So from my view, what I see in what we have again in India is certainly insufficient knowledge of PPE. This is and can be an issue, and I think that it's something that we really need to highlight, certainly from a management perspective. You know, if we're writing white paper documents and dealing with risk assessment, it's not just a case of renting the machine or buying the machine. We should really be thinking about the operator and the passengers. You know, what's the additional equipment we need to keep these guys, or minimize the risk of a potential accident happening. So certainly we need to focus on the harness, we need to focus on the lanyard, making sure that what we have fits the purpose. There's no point having the operator in the platform with the wrong PPE, because if and when we need to use this equipment, perhaps it becomes against us rather than for us. Lack of training, I have added that in, because I think, again, you know, we should be looking at adding harness training and inspection, the whole process of training, to help the operators understand certainly more depth then of what PPE equipment is, and certainly how we maintain it, and certainly how do we wear it. I think there's also a lack of the divide between a fall arrest lanyard and a restraint. They both do different jobs. And finally, I think cost always comes into using the incorrect PPE. So just rewinding the clock slightly, I think that, again, going back to your risk assessment, please leave a section there for PPE against, whether it's a scissor lift or a boom lift, and understand that you may be incorporating hazards by asking an operator to use a harness on a vertical platform. So Ali, if we can go to the next slide. So there's a short video which is going to be played. It's quite an old video. It's been out for, an old film. It's been out for some time, so some of you would have already seen this safety video. It's the message, the key message on the video is to give you an idea of the impact of an operator working in a platform and certainly moving or driving over rough ground and even ground, a typical job site, I guess, because we don't have the luxury of having level surfaces at all times. So, like I say, as you'll watch the video, it's certainly a good key indicator to give you an idea in your mind of what does a harness do and how much it affects the operator. So, bearing in mind that the video clip here is purely focusing on a boom type machine rather than a scissor lift. This is where we would certainly question. It depends of your platform movement and the activity in the platform on a vertical lift, because we don't want to put an increase of hazard on a vertical. So in a moment you'll see the operator, he have set up this scenario just as a demonstration. You cannot normally drive the machines as a 3B category from the ground controls. It's only normally driven from the platform controls. The mannequin inside the platform is around 175 pounds. You can see that there's been prefabricated ramps, which the driver or the operator will drive the machine over the ramps. And I think we have a glitch with the video. Yeah, maybe. I don't think we're having a very good day. There we go. But as you can see, the movement of the operator inside the platform, once we go over the first ramps, certainly is quite aggressive. And then as we're driving over the second ramp, you can see the difference then, which is certainly putting some major or some serious hazard against our operator as we start driving at a certain height. You'll notice also that the platform has been raised, so that has actually taken the platform into the elevated drive speed. So it's not at the fastest speed that we're going to operate. Okay, Ali, if you can take us to the next slide. So Hugh, I can see that you're in the background. Thanks for joining us. You're on mute at the moment, Hugh.
Yes, my friend, I was following you. I've been following you on my other screen. I had some hiccups getting online, but everything's good now. Okay. Very informative and very relevant stuff that you're sharing here. Thank you.
We've had a few bumps. I don't know if it's from my side or not, but anyhow, we're in action, so we're rolling. So just picking back up, Hugh, really, what I've been doing with the guys is giving them an overview of, the main reason why we're wearing harnesses. Naturally, we have different types of platforms, so some lift up and down, some lift out. As an industry, we kind of have we're misled by one shoe fits all, I think, and this can be quite challenging. And I certainly think for safety professionals on site, practitioners and HSE people, contractors, clients, and I think it's easy to get pushed in the wrong direction, if I may say, of wearing the incorrect PPE. So the image which we see in front of us now, Clive, Hugh, you're back on mute again.
That's okay, no problem.
So, and the interesting takeaway on this slide is the qualification. And I think that this is where, as safety professionals, we should be looking at this to check whether the operator has had and received some sort of training for wearing his PPE inside the platform. And you'll notice the letter H on the types on the PAL card, and that indicates that this person, this operator, has cleared a 3B course, so now he's on a boom lift, and I've now trained him with the H, meaning he's received the harness and obviously passed the harness module as well. So I think that helps, Hugh, if we can highlight these kind of things.
Jason, I couldn't agree more. A lot of my experience in terms of the use of harnesses, both for arrest, for restraint, has been in the steel and construction industries in India and elsewhere in Asia Pacific. And one of the big pitfalls I see is the fact, as you said, either people are using the wrong harnesses or they're not trained to wear them correctly. And I've seen some really horrendous accidents where gentlemen in particular have been wearing the harness incorrectly around the crotch area and to sustain some very serious injuries.
Yeah.
So I think fit, I think ensuring the harness capacity, as you've said, maintenance and inspection. And it's not about cost, it's about having the right tool to do the job, as the harness is ultimately, in many respects, the last resort in terms of protection. It's important to the right quality, integrity, and right spec to do the job. So I couldn't agree more with the need to certify. I think it's great, and I think it's something we should be trying to promote in India, but elsewhere across the region as well.
Yeah, it's something which is really on the agenda. Certainly for us for this year is we're doing very well on training for operators, but I think we need to focus on the other areas because we're still seeing incidents, and the more that we can give, then the stronger the industry becomes. Then I think.
I mean, if you look at the major cause of industries in industry for accidents and fatalities, falls from height is there. We really do to address them. If we can't get fundamentals right, like harnesses, something's wrong. And I think in some respects, it'd be good if we can approach some of the trade associations around the world, or even people like the National Association of Safety in India, and try and get them giving some backup to you, Jason, because some of the worst accidents I've had to deal with, the fatalities, have been falls from height, and one's bad enough. So the more we can push in, the more backing we can get, and I'm 100% to try and drive this with you.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But I think for the audience, Hugh, is to, as safety professionals or practitioners, we should be asking, has the operative been trained in to use the equipment? But guess what? Also, we need to be trained in how to use the PPE equipment correctly, and filtering it down to the safety department of what harness is required for this type of activity. Naturally, it's totally different to scaffolding, but yet we see 80%, if not more, lanyards are a scaffolding lanyards, a twin lanyard with a scaffolding hook, which becomes a headache for us.
Jason, do IPAF promote any online training that could be made available to some of the safety professionals in India, perhaps through IRSN?
Yeah, we have. So we have a ME&SA for managers training course, which I'm actually offering free to every attendee of the 4-day sessions. I think we have something like 280 HSE professionals registered for the 4 days. So there's 280 links going out, and there is also a harness module which anyone can attend through our network of training providers in India. So there is certainly training modules out there and available.
Thanks, Jason. The reason I asked that question, I was aware myself, but I wasn't sure how many of our attendees are. We take a lot for granted, and we don't realise just what great stuff IPAF offer. And I think if you capitalise on this, it's making workplaces safer. It's making us more complete as professionals.
I think so, and it's not just IPAF; it's across the board.
Yes, yeah.
As IRSM, for an example, or IOSH, your chapters are growing very fast. And in India we have OSHI, who's another fast-growing chapter, and certainly, that if we can embed it through these kind of pathways, I think it helps us grow the safety message. Ali, if you can move on to the next slide. So I've just got a couple of key indicators now, Hugh, and this relates to operator training. Operator training shouldn't be delivered within a 30-minute or a 40-minute module. It should generally be quite thorough. And naturally, we should start at the beginning of let's talk about HSE, because health and safety is very important. And we need to know and understand the reasons why there's a need to wear personal protective equipment. So I always think that HSE should be in this module, and it certainly should be at the starting point, because we can grow and build on this. As you can see on the slide, there's a few images of who should be inspecting and what should they inspect. So that can be anything from buckles, from stitching, from web ties. We're indicating that piece of equipment is fit for purpose. Within that training module, somebody needs to fit it. And part of that class, we need to make sure that the attendees then certainly should understand on, which way around do we fit it? Where does the D-shackle fit on the body? What does comfortable look like? What does uncomfortable look like? And I think that these kind of indicators are massive for training. As I mentioned, Hugh, it shouldn't be a 20 or 30-minute talk. There's your certificate. It's thorough.
Jackson,
I'm
fully agree with
talking
you.
4 hours of a module to deliver it correctly. We have this in Middle East regions where training centers are already delivering these modules, and they use it as an add-on to the boom lift training which they already deliver. So I think that this is something that we should be pushing as safety people in India. To let's look at the qualification, but also let's look at the content of what's in there, because when the students or the operators come back to your project with that trained and competent certificate, we want to make sure that their training satisfies your project, and it kind of meets both angles then, I think. But certainly training, I would highlight, and it should certainly be a good duration, not a very fast delivered training module.
Yes, very much so, Jason. And also, in terms of the actual industries I've worked in around the world, we've always made like any other piece of PPE, pre-start, okay to start, an inspection to make sure that kit's fit for purpose and safe to use. And if it's not safe to use, zero tolerance in terms of using any defective equipment. But equally important, having completed the work, is doing a final inspection to make sure it's not been damaged in any way or misused or perhaps harmed under the nature of the work. So if it is in need of any attention after the work, it should be put to one side, quarantined and repaired. So I think that's sometimes where we forget. We assume it's going to be right for the next use without inspecting. And that can be a problem as well when it comes to actually requiring it as a deterrent or an abatement in work.
Yeah. And again, 100%, behind you here, Hugh. And I think there's 3 good takeaways from this is, we got to understand on what's the process of introducing the harness to your project. We need to understand what is your requirement for using, as you mentioned, pre-use inspection as a function and kind of look, feel, and function kind of checks. And what happens if it goes wrong? What happens if there's a defect? What do we do with the harness then? How do we, or what is your site rules for disposal then of the equipment? And this rewinds the clock back then to the training aspect, I think, Hugh, that all this needs to be in the content which is delivered to the user. And when you kind of put everything together, it kind of jigsaws then, I think, into one nice jigsaw. And we don't have any pieces missing, if that makes sense.
Very much so, Jason. That's a good point there. I think you're right, making that complete loop. And also, as you said, one of the problems we face, particularly in the developing countries, is cost. And the fact that people think, it's defective, we'll still get away with it. It's going to cost us X amount of rupees for a new one. We can't afford to do that. We can't compromise people's safety at that cost.
Yeah, I don't think that cost should really come into it, because harnesses are really a reasonable price now, I think. And I think that it's not something where it's going to cost you a tremendous amount.
Jason,
They
I agree
are
with you.
reasonable.
Yeah,
We just got to make sure it's fit for purpose, I think,
yeah.
and
I
it's
think,
going
yeah.
to certainly do the job that we want it to do. So, Ali, if you can just skip on to the next slide a minute. It's so
Yeah.
frustrating when you're not in control of your slideshow.
It's okay. It's okay. It's good. You've done a good flow, honestly. The pair of you together
Yeah.
have done a great job.
So a couple of key points. We've got a few slides now on key pointers because this is real life. And when it goes wrong, it can severely go wrong. And this is stepping back now to our responsibilities as safety professionals. And we shouldn't think for one moment that this falls under the rental company's responsibility. But this is really us as safety guys on site. Because if it goes wrong and an operator is flung out of the platform, there's a couple of things comes to my mind straight away is we need to save this guy as quickly as possible. So the equipment which he's using as PPE needs to be correct. His harness point where he's connecting his hook to or carabiner needs to be in the right position. There's a burning question of if an incident happens, should we move the machine? Of course not. Perhaps that you might increase the chance of the machine tipping over. So you've got to really play a very careful step here when an incident happens like this. But what you must have, excuse me, as a safety professionals and practitioners, surely is a rescue plan. And if you have no plan, then something is wrong. There is a process of rescuing somebody at height from an elevating work platform. Hugh, if the safety professionals sit through the ME&SA for Managers course, this process is certainly described in some depth to the safety professional. And also, if you attend an IPAF operator course, again, it's part of the training so that the operator is familiarized with the process of certainly bringing the platform back to safety. Naturally, to this extreme, which we see on the slides today, then something would be out of the norm. So we would need another emergency plan then to suit this activity then. So, it's quite deep when you think about it. And again, I go back to training. The training should be delivered at an adequate pace. And what I mean by that, an adequate pace of content within that program.
Very much so. Jason, I couldn't agree more. People never think about the what if scenario. And I think that's where, sometimes we fail in the risk assessment process. We accept the normal, we sometimes consider the abnormal break times, shift changeovers, but the emergency planning is so important, particularly for things like work at height, and particularly how to react in an out of control condition such as this. So I'm so pleased that's in the training.
Yeah, and I think we mustn't forget that the rental companies are actually there to help and support projects. And it's quite normal for a rental company to come and do a toolbox talk on rescue plan, for the workforce on a safety week, for an example. It's quite normal for a rental company to do a familiarization to the users, which would include emergency process then of bringing the platform back to the safe zone. So these things are quite normal. We're not asking for things out of the norm. Ali, if you can just switch to the next slide.
And I think that's something we should try to do on a regular basis because of the positive reinforcement. Because the problem is people sometimes forgetting human nature is to react and respond either fight or flight. Whereas if we've got this inherent regular reminder of how we should react in an emergency, I think it makes us better prepared as professionals.
Yeah, and I think there's some good points you just mentioned there, Hugh, is shift pattern changes. So we have a new workforce for the next 12 hours from the first 12 hours. And maybe the phase of the project changes also. So surely then my risk assessment should have more key indicators then to kind of suit that activity or the workforce then. And again, just moving on to the next slide, you can see again, the first two images, people tend to climb if they can't quite reach in the steel industry, Hugh. This is quite normal, unfortunately. But in reality, it gives us a big headache. And the reason why is if you think of the lanyard, the term for restraint lanyard is to restrain the operator in the platform. So we're restraint in his movement, meaning that we're restricting his ability to climb. The moment I loosen my lanyard and I have more of a length lanyard, then the more chance I have to climb, then to step on the mid rail or even on the top handrail. The issue which I have goes back to my first slide, which we had a key indicator of a downward drop,
Yes.
which was giving me around 600 kgs of a lateral force then. So if you talk about side load then of platforms, if you calculate and divide lateral force against side load of a machine, then it doesn't add up. So the impact is severe. And you've mentioned also, Hugh, about the positioning of the harness on the body. If it's loose fitted, for an example, at a direct fall like this, we can expect some severe damage to the body and some certainly being uncomfortable. On the top right-hand picture, the image, you can see it's a boom type machine with a person with a harness connected, and he's kind of working quite safely and comfortable there. His handrail is preventing the fall, but also he's clipped into the anchorage point. The question mark on the scissor lift on the vertical, let's please remember that sometimes the platforms in these kind of machines are not always one size. We have extendable decks, as I would call them, so they could be a single extension or a double extension. Well, if we're using a harness with a 1.8 meter lanyard, but potentially we've got a 4 meter length platform, then again the numbers don't add up. So we need to start thinking about, is it really necessary to wear a harness and lanyard, or have a lanyard clipped onto an anchorage point in a vertical machine? I think that really determines what activities you need to be doing up there. Naturally, Hugh, if we're driving over rough ground and even ground, then perhaps I would say, please, Hugh, put a harness on in that activity. But again, it's back to risk management, I think. So I would always question a vertical lift, I think.
I think you make some really valid points there, Jason. And again, one of the things I've tried to discourage globally in the steel industry is for people standing on and operating outside of in the manner that you mentioned. I've also tried to encourage them, if they do need to do work outside of the actual cage itself, then use some form of tool that's extendable, ensuring that it's secured to either them or to some parts of the actual cage, to ensure that if it does fall, it's not going to cause injury to anybody else, or cause them to try and reach out of the harness, grab it, and perhaps out of the actual cage, grab it, and then mean that they're actually subject to fall themselves. So I think it all comes back to, as you said, to the risk assessment, the right tools for the job, and the right safe working practice.
Yeah, no, important and important words there. And I think that the key is always to keep referring back to the operator's manual, because there will always be information there of the harness anchorage point of what is tested to, which will then needs to relate to the lanyard which we're going to use. So Ali, if you can jump to the next slide for me. And then we just indicate, obviously we got anchorage points. We do have a campaign, a safety harness campaign, which we've had for many years, and we call it Clunk Click. But in theory, it's trying to remember to click your harness into position through the anchorage point. The top image is correct. However, we do see a lot of scaffolding hook type carabiners being used on anchorage points. Arguably that could be okay as long as it's in a restraint position. But if we was to take a fall, I would ask the question then, would that carabiner fail then with that sudden impact of 600 kgs? And perhaps I would ask the question, would a scaffolding carabiner always fit around a harness anchorage point in a platform? And the answer would be no. On certain type of boom lifts, the position of the anchorage point won't allow that scaffolding hook to go through. So we know where it's going after that. So Ali, if you can switch to the next slide. Yeah, and as you can see, that's where our friend generally appears if I can't fit it in the designated anchorage point. So just some takeaways there is, please remember, there are different types of carabiners. and lanyards, but we must certainly focus on where they need to be connected. And there's a reason why they need to be connected there, because we must think of the safety of the operator whilst he's moving the platform into his work zone. Okay, Ali? I think we're running over on time slightly. Anyhow, again, this is us in action, Hugh. It's quite normal, as I mentioned, for us to do toolbox talks to support projects. Myself and our fellow members in many regions, we have been and we are out on site. It's great fun in a way, because we can certainly get on project level and understand, you know, the restrictions and the key hazards which you have to deal with from a project's perspective. So getting on site and talking to the workforce is massive, I think. We might be saying the same things, Hugh, as IPAF and a safety manager, but really, as it becomes a different voice, it becomes a different approach. So there's many toolbox talks available. We have them through IPAF. I think we have something like 22 toolbox talks available, supported with some safety posters. We call him Andy Access. So Andy Access is the good guy in the white hat. And then we have the bad guy then in the grey hat, which I think you'll like, Hugh, because his name is also Hugh Hazard.
Oh God, that's a name like Hugh. It's desperate when you're on site. That's why I get people to call me Max instead.
Yeah, our mascot was he came alive around 2017, I believe, which then we've seen a focus then on trying to give additional support. But it's backed up by toolbox talks, and we have translated the posters into split language for India, so we do have them in English and in Hindi as well for the projects. They're free to download. If you send us emails in, we can certainly send them across. If you want your logo on there, we can put your logo, so we can have it so it suits, again, your project and supports any white paper documents that you have in place, and it also supports the training, which is naturally being done also. So there's a lot of work, certainly, which we've done behind the scenes there, Hugh, to try and certainly help and support projects like the ones which you continuously run.
Jason, fully support and fully appreciate the great things that IPAF are doing in this area. Things can never be enough. Is that my good friend Jason in that top slide there?
Yes. Jason Anker, yeah.
And Jason knows firsthand, because he gives some very emotive talks, sharing his experience. Because unfortunately, Jason was one of the unfortunate people who was badly injured as a fall from height. And I think, you know, nobody is a bigger, really, adversary of how important good working at height practices are than Jason and his team. So it's great to see another Jason on the case as well, Mr. Woods.
Yeah, no, he's a great friend, if I'm honest. And I invited Jason across for the 2019 event in Maiden Racecourse in Dubai, and he spoke in and around his accident. He actually stayed the week, and we travelled around to government entities. We went to Oshad in Abu Dhabi, Dubai Municipality, and we also went to a few projects. And the image which you can see, it's in the Al Nabuda Safety Theatre. It's where they do a lot of their safety talks in Hindi. They don't talk English, and everything
Fantastic.
is in and around the Hindi speaking. And they make their own tools for training also, which is it's fantastic. Their team is outstanding, and it's breathtaking.
And I think that's a great point you've made there, Jason. As much as we can get some of this material translated into the local languages, I mean, the first time I did actual hands-on training in India was in 2005, after a fatality with a contractor, and I was told that everybody spoke English. Our managers were convinced everybody spoke English. I arrived first I arrived into Chennai, went down to Pondi. I was in Pondicherry, where we quickly had to convert the slides from English into Tamil. And then 2 days later, I was up in Pune, where we're doing the same in Marathi. So, you know, there's 33 main languages, and we have to respect that if we want to get the right message across to the people. And again, sometimes using visuals, as you said, like here, so that everybody understands it rather than making it over verbose, where some
Yeah.
words don't translate in different languages. So I think it's a great piece of training here, and I think it's an initiative we should be trying to encourage everybody to buy into.
Yeah, and we're fully behind it, Hugh. You know, if any safety professional wants to get in touch and needs help on their project, then we're there 100%.
Fantastic, Jason.
And I think that that's the real message out there for this week. I
Great
know,
stuff.
as I mentioned yesterday, Hugh, that safety in India is not just for 1 week. We're just trying to support additional safety work, which everyone is doing. So, Ali, I think that's my last slide now. I think. So I do apologize for the few bumps in the slide presentations earlier. Um, I just thought I was sharing, but obviously I wasn't sharing, not properly anyway. So, but we get there, and it's good to have hiccups because it means that it's real. Um, so I'll pass it back to yourself now, Ali. So it's back over to yourself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jason. First and foremost, welcome, Sir Hugh Maxwell,
Hi,
for
thank you.
joining us. And I would like to introduce Romana to help read and give you questions that you will answer, both of you.
Do you want me to answer this, Hugh?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question. Is it regarding? I've seen the question on the screen from
Yeah,
Vanita.
that's it.
Regarding,
Yeah,
I think the important thing is, I'll shoot first, and you can reinforce if you like, my friend.
yeah,
Um,
okay.
in terms of the problem is in the hierarchy controls, PP is down very very low in the hierarchy controls. But when it comes to certain aspects of work, such as working at height, sometimes or exposure to chemicals, PPE may be the only control or the only effective control protecting the person, the human sort of hazard interface. So I understand it is confusing, but it's based on the risk assessment in terms of practicality of what you can use to control things. And similar to as we talked about lanyards, as we talked about fixed fall arrest at the systems, it's sometimes horses for courses, getting the right situation where the PPE may be the only defence you can actually use.
Yeah, I think just to add on there, Hugh, is that we must think of what the job is in a certain aspect of the platform positioning and the type of platform which we're going to be using. And I think that is key here. We must also think that the type of equipment then as PPE needs to match whatever the manufacturer is recommending. So if it's a typical anchorage point, then we should be talking a restraint lanyard, not fall arrest, and we should be thinking that the connector or the carabiner needs to fit comfortable through the anchorage point. And then on the person, then the lanyard must be as short as possible to minimize any kind of trip. Okay.
Okay, so we move to the next question. It's from Victor Teodorico. It's to Jason. What is the lifespan of the safety harness and what is the frequency of the third party inspection of harness?
That's a good question, Victor, and thank you. Um, I'm going to sit on the fence for the lifespan because manufacturers may differ. You may find that some will have a 3-year lifespan, some may have a 5, and some may have a 10. So I think that's one thing to take into consideration. If you look on the data information of the harness or lanyard from the manufacturer, it will indicate what is the typical lifespan. But also what you should think about is what are you using it for? Is it in a very hot climate? Is it in a chemical industry? Perhaps that it may give you a 3-year lifespan, but in reality, it's a 6-month lifespan. So again, you'd have to think of these key factors. And in terms of inspection, well, we've got to think of what type of inspection. Is it a logged inspection, or is it an inspection where it's a pre-use inspection, meaning checking your functions, your buckles, your webbing ties, your connectors. So again, there's different inspections. I don't know if you want to add anything onto that, Hugh, but it really depends of, what type of inspections we're actually looking at.
Couldn't agree more, Jason. I put that very well. One of the scary things I see, one of the ANSIs I've read in the past says that you should replace lanyards every 10 years. But I think you're totally right. It all depends on the environment, all depends on the frequency of use, whether they're damaged or not, whether the hostile conditions, chemicals, and other things may cause problems. So I don't think you can say sort of definitively a time scale. I think you're totally right what you say there. Inspect it, talk to the suppliers if there are doubts. And if you do think that the life's 3 years, try and build some form of safety net in there so that you replace them 6 or 9 months beforehand, because it's quite often that people go past the date. If they do become worn or damaged, the last thing we do is compromise people's safety. So for me, it's always better to replace beforehand than wait till after for failure.
Yeah, it's creating a kind of internal system, I think, Hugh. Okay.
So the next question is from Mohammed Shijaz. Could you please elaborate the emergency rescue arrangements that need to be in place, especially for rescuing a person who fell from a mute and hang in a safety harness? This is for Jason.
I love that I get all the questions, Hugh.
You're doing a great job, Jason, and you know your stuff so well, my friend.
First of all, I think you've got to look at the incident, really, and perhaps that one is different to the other, depending on the platform angle and so on. If we talk about inside the platform first, there's a natural process of bringing the platform to the safe zone, and that can be delivered and controlled either by the ground controls or moving in, or platform controls, then ground controls, and then moving into emergency descent systems. And that can be delivered either by batteries as auxiliary, or it could be hydraulics. So I think that's my first step. If we're talking of the extreme where a person is left hanging, I think that we should have a plan in place where that we can quickly get something to that person who's hanging, because remember that trauma will be starting to affect the body at faster rather than slower. So if you're not careful, you could get caught in this position. So my first question back to Mohammed would be, what would your plan be then from MUP to MUP, and looking at a time scale, how quick can you actually get another platform in place? Or you would have to come up with something. You couldn't just leave it that we would turn a blind eye to this. Many sites kind of avoid this area. They just have a basic emergency rescue plan. But I think that we should have something which is in place if we have this potential risk. And don't forget, we should try it to make sure that it does work, because if we test it as an emergency drill, then at the real scenario, then we know our process is going to be complete then.
Good answer, Jason. If you don't mind me saying, in my experience, when I try to develop an emergency plan for something like this, I always try and think along the lines of time being the T standing for task, the I standing for the individuals concerned, the M standing for a methodology which suits that work environment, which allows you to react rapidly and quickly, and the E standing for the equipment and environment. Because I think if you consider those 5 aspects of it, it enables you to put in place something that's practicable, something that the guys can actually prepare for. When they're taking the work, they know how to react and respond if it does go off key. You don't want big pages of stuff. You don't want something where there's equipment away. You want something that's practical to actually act on and respond to immediately. It may be something as straightforward as some form of ladder arrangement or some form of scaffolding arrangement to get in there under there, if you've got the space and the asset for that. In other cases, it may be something much more sophisticated.
I think just another add on there, Hugh, is that the system needs to be certainly sufficient to be used, but also we should have maybe a nominated team as a rescue team. And what I mean by that, then, that these guys are trained then in that emergency scenario. Then,
Jason, yeah, I treat it exactly the same as confined space. You're stuck up in
yeah,
the air where you have basically that emergency, you have the emergency equipment standby, you have that emergency team trained, and as you said quite rightly, the people put into practice how to react and respond if need be, which is great if this is sort of something that's regular or semi-regular. It's much more difficult when it's a non-standard or a one-off thing that's being done.
yeah, no, 100%. And I think that, how do we get, as safety professionals, how do we get competent and more knowledge? And I think that, again, it's not one shoe fits all. We should be looking at developing our safety portfolio as individuals. And this is why I've added MEEPs for managers to every attendee of these sessions, to give you the starting point, your first step on that ladder, which will help you then and help you understand, the process of or managing this type of equipment.
And again, this is where I think it's so invaluable sharing the learnings of IPAF with yourself and other professionals going around sites doing different scenarios, because there's always going to be those anomalies out there where people think, oh, we've never faced this one. Whereas at least with you guys going around the sites and actually seeing what's happening in the real world, it enables your feedback and actually change and develop your own practices.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure.
Okay, so we go to the next question. Vimlesh Kumar is asking, what will be the life of full body harness and when it is to be discarded?
I think we've already answered that one. It depends on the manufacturer. It may vary from one manufacturer to another. So we'd have to check and seek their advice for guidelines.
All right, so we'll do a last question now.
Yeah.
It is from Arun Bansal. Actually, Arun Bansal has commented quite a lot a few times. So he's asking, is it required to attach your safety harness at the bottom of the mute platform? Because some platform of mute have anchoring point at the top of mute.
It's a very good question. Do you want me to answer it, Hugh?
Yes, please, Jason, if you don't mind.
Okay, so to start off with, anchorage points may vary in different positions of work platforms. So traditionally, you would see an anchorage point at the base where your feet stand, okay, and you'll see a little hole then of a plate where you would put your hook in, or your next anchorage point could be kind of developed around the mid-rail of the platform. In terms of standards, you'll find that standards will give a manufacturer the minimal distance of the distance from the floor to the anchorage point, and then they will, under standards, manufacturing standards, have a maximum distance. But I think that we need to identify what type of machines are being used or rented, and we would need to understand where the anchorage points are, and then we ask the question to the workforce of, do we have the right connectors for the machines that we're going to use? So you're kind of being proactive then, and one step ahead then before the machines arrive on our projects, so we know what PP equipment we're going to be using.
I think Hugh is on mute.
I think you're on mute again.
Sorry, my friend, yes, I'm agreeing with you there. I'm saying it's right. And again, I think we do need to work with the actual suppliers of the equipment, because again, when it comes to the actual weight distribution, we need to ensure we're anchoring at the right place so that it can actually cope with a person falling as a restraint. So I think the more we can rely and work with the suppliers on these things and stick to their rules, the safer the working practice is going to be.
Yeah, it's very challenging for us, I think. So yeah.
All right, so we have one more question. Like, it's the last question, so can we cover it, guys?
Yeah, we'll take one more final question.
So it's from Tarun Tiwari. Can you please elaborate on the suspension trauma effect, time frame in which we need to rescue a person in suspension? Also, are there any rescue equipment available specifically for mutes?
You want to answer the first part, Hugh?
I
Certainly,
think
yeah.
let you
Yeah.
answer this.
Well, one of the problems, obviously, depending on how they're wearing the harness, can be actually cutting off the blood supply. And because a person's being suspended in an unnatural body way, obviously you're restricting the flow of blood, oxygen. People will panic. They're in an uncomfortable position. They're feeling unsafe. The panic and anxiety will set in. So the effect of suspension trauma can affect different people over different spaces of time, depending on how the harness is fitted, depending on the environment in which they're hanging, if they're feeling unsafe or feeling they're exposed to danger. For example, if it was a situation where you're over a pickling vat or something, or over an unsafe thing to fall on, then obviously the psychological part of it is going to have as big an impact on people and put additional pressure on the rescue team trying to get the people down safely.
And I think just one more thing to add on there, and that was a great answer there, Hugh, is we must also think of platform positioning, because perhaps that we're now in a danger zone, and we're in the area of possibly machine failure, meaning tip over. So that there's a lot to consider, I think, and this should be at the highlight of your risk assessment also.
Very much so, Jason. Good point. Thank you.
Okay, I think we will close questions. So thank you very much for everybody who's attended, and certainly some very good constructive questions there. Hugh, thank you very much for joining us. I know
A
that
pleasure, Jason. Thank you. Although it was
you're a
late, thank you.
well-traveled man, but no, I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that we'll catch up in the near future, in terms of what we can do and where we can work together on development.
Lovely, Jason. Thank you. I'd like that
Good
opportunity. That'd be
stuff.
great.
Yeah, no, that's good. Okay, well, thank you again, Hugh, for supporting us and coming to join us on day two.
And thanks for the
Thank you.
opportunity and thanks for the great work you guys do. I do want to. I follow it regularly, not just on LinkedIn, but with the magazine and publications. And
Good.
I think if more organisations took a stand as proactively as you guys, there will be a much safer place.
Yeah, good stuff. I didn't pay you too much, I hope.
No, not at all, my friend. No, but really, I'd say that's one of the things I'm a big believer that, the more we can get the industries themselves shouting and making people recognise, and I don't think we always do it enough. I think sometimes there's a sheepishness or there's reticence because people think it's about selling the products. And Jason, I think the way you put it across, it's all about safety first, mate. It comes from the heart. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that's the real important message, I think, and we have so many good people out there to help us. If you look at manufacturers of machines, the machines available to the audience now is massive. The training being delivered, the content of the training, our teachers, our rental companies, it's all kind of fit in to help and support these projects.
Excellent. Thank you.
No, good stuff. So again, thank you, Hugh. Always a pleasure to work with you. Thank you to the IPAF team who's worked
Yes.
very hard
Thank you very
behind the
much.
scenes. And certainly thank you very much for joining us as the audience. We can't run these without people to certainly present to. So please keep attending. This week is dedicated to India to try and help India strive forward. You have some fantastic projects and some great people. So tomorrow we have another session, which we're going to talk about the operator's risk and the potential risk, which the operators should be aware of whilst working in the platform. So another great topic. And then day 4, then we have some active manufacturers who's sitting around a table with me, and we're going to kind of have a good heavy discussion on machine equipment in India, and also machine registration. So making sure that the manufacturers are still kept up to speed, and the owner, of course. But anyway, so 2 more good sessions. Thank you very much. I do apologize for the glitches. We got over them. We've run slightly over, but you can't fault a good old safety talk anyway, I think. So thank you, and today we will close. Thank you very much.
All the best. Cheers. Bye-bye.
We would like to thank the following sponsors: Coolant, Osh India, Snorkel, Genie, JLE. Our association partners: Oshai, enhancing HSE and culture; Sarah, Construction Equipment Rental Association; and our media partner, WSHH, World of Safety and Health Nation. We would also like to welcome ManLib, Sudhir, powering the future; iRise India,